Actually, I'm going to make you full screen first, and then I think does it? Oh, it goes even more full screen. Okay. All right. So yeah, more people might roll in slowly as classes get out. I think some classes, the one I'm supposed to be in ends at 5:15, and then I come after the fact, but I wanted to be here. So anyway, yeah, if you're ready, take it away.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Tarn Adams from Bay 12 Games and bay12games.com. Our main game is Dwarf Fortress. We also made Liberal Crime Squad, World War One Medic, and various other crap that's on the website, but those are the main ones. And Dwarf Fortress is by far the one that people know the most. So yeah, I guess I'm just going to talk about the design of Dwarf Fortress, programming Dwarf Fortress, and then take questions, which hopefully people will have questions, because I don't really give lots of talks about Dwarf Fortress. I mostly answer questions about it. So, and as the video game development club, I don't know what you guys are, what your backgrounds are. I mean, I know you're a lot of programmers and artists and stuff, but I don't know what you're familiar with and what'll bore you and so on. So, feel free to interrupt and move me along, interrupt and ask questions and so on, because yeah, otherwise it might be a short little train wreck, and then we talk about things. But I've got things to talk about. So yeah, Dwarf Fortress. The four people I can see. I mean, how many people have heard of it or know anything about it? Anything?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so I won't waste too much time saying it's a game or whatever. But yeah, it is a video game for the PC and Mac and Linux, and we just distribute it for free online. The basic idea is that we wanted to have this. Well, I say we all the time. That's my brother and I. Wanted to have this sort of fantasy world storytelling engine and simulator where you could come in and take the role of one of the actors in the game. And we had many iterations of it, mostly role-playing games, but the one that happened to work out was the one where you play a fortress full of dwarves. So, oddly enough, that's the main mode of the game. So the game doesn't have any graphics really to speak of. There are modders and so on now that have kind of taken that over, but the original game is just sort of this kind of text game in the sort of older generation of roguelikes style of a text grid with letters and 16 colors and so on. They've got text roguelikes with VGA graphics now and graphical ones and so on, but it has just for faster development. It has that kind of style of graphics, so I don't have to draw anything. What is this? Okay, I'm going to go put this away. What are you doing? There we go. All right. So yeah, so when you fire up the game, you kind of see where we're coming from immediately, because you press create a new world, and to pop up a map of the world that it slowly puts together for you. It generates the elevation, rivers, vegetation, places the wilderness populations, and then places civilizations, gives them pantheons of gods or whatever they might be doing. And they spread out and trade with each other and start wars and so on. And there's tens of thousands of historical figures, and you can go through hundreds of years, and your computer will get kind of bogged down in kerchunk, and then you decide you're tired of it and then stop and run the world at that point. And then you can kind of pick the main mode of the game, the fortress mode. You can pick a spot where you want to embark, and you start with 7 dwarves and a wagon full of little items, and dig out a fortress. And there's no overarching narrative. There's no real goals that the game gives you at all. There's some kind of implied goals when you start getting the nobility demanding things or feeding people, things that you kind of would have to do to keep the game going. But it's not really a story. It doesn't have a fixed narrative, but it is sort of a story-driven game all the same. And it's what we're interested in ultimately, is getting sort of stories for people to experience and share with their friends and so on. And I might as well mention there's also the adventure mode of the game, which is sort of this unformed RPG. We're just kind of working on our old style of doing RPGs in this setting, and but there's not much to speak of there. Yeah, so that's just the basic backdrop of what we'll be talking about that game. In case no one had kind of heard of it or whatever, that's the general idea. So I guess I'll talk about the design of the game now, or just kind of what in general we had been trying to accomplish. And if you have like specific questions, you can ask them now or later, because I wasn't sure what to focus on or whatever. There's a lot of design to it. We've been writing the game for 11 years now, so it's there's a lot of going on. But the I guess the important thing to start with is I've been writing games for maybe 30 years now. I don't remember a time when I wasn't writing games. Just as a small child. It kind of came in with reading and so on. My father would kind of have us, sit and learn how to write basic programs at the same time we were learning how to add and so on. It was very strange childhood like that, I guess, because at least back then, maybe all you guys kind of, all the people here kind of had that kind of thing, but who knows, because people have computers these days, but people didn't really have computers when I was growing up. In any case, so it's hard sometimes to talk about design, is what I'm getting at. At least where things came from. When people say, ask me where the original idea came from for a fantasy game that we were working on. I mean, it's just one of those childhood things. So I don't really have any idea. But so Dwarf Fortress went through several iterations. There was Drag Slay, the basic version in Basic, where you just kind of went through this sequential boss rush, more or less, fighting different dragons and little things on the way. And then there was a C version that we wrote in high school, which had a world map and towns and critters running around, even more so than we've accomplished in Dwarf Fortress, with that kind of thing, with the armies running around and sacking towns and stuff. And then there was the first version that we put online, Armok, Slaves to Armok, God of Blood, which was a really bad VGA, or not 3D graphics, really terrible game. But it sort of set us down the road of just having a whole lot of procedural stuff in the game. And that's really the main thing about designing the Dwarf Fortress. We wanted to make this kind of generic setting, and as children we had games we could play, but the games we wrote, we couldn't really play them if they had fixed narratives. We weren't interested in building that kind of thing because we kind of wanted to surprise each other, have a game we could play a bunch of times. So we ended up focusing on games that would be different every time. And there are several ways to do that. You can have a multiplayer game. They kind of existed back then. We didn't really know about, the sort of bulletin board mud type things that were going on. And but we did know about roguelikes and strategy games like Civilization that built their own maps. And Starflight built its own kind of maps and creatures and so on. There were games back then that did a lot of procedural stuff. So and not just the kind of roguelike maps that people generally think about. And so that's why we decided to go that way. We were like, okay, we can make our own games. They can be replayable, and we can just do what we're interested in. And so we just started, from the beginning with procedural generation. You want to write the game, you have to decide what you want to make and what level of abstraction you want to do it with, and so on. And it's difficult sometimes, depending on how obsessed you are with details, to restrain yourself from going too deep into the procedural generation, which is a problem we had with the first game, definitely. When we started putting like the density of the hair on different body parts and how curly it was and so on, before we had towns and NPCs and things that were kind of necessary for having a game, we're like, well, we're definitely, because we have, every failed project along the way can teach lessons, both true and false, about what happens with or why games go wrong, right? And so at that point, we we had just gotten through a scuttling. I don't remember quite what it was we were upset about, but with Armok 1, we were like, okay, we're going bottom up this time. And so we started at the bottom and built creatures from scratch. They had all the tissues of their body parts, and they would melt and so on. What are you doing? And so it was really really a mess. So there were spells you could teleport off people's body parts, and it would change the model because we had this 3D graphics to keep up. So you could pluck out eyes, they'd disappear. The nose you could tear off and it would leave a hole. You could flay the skin off of people and it would show this kind of muscle texture and so on. And it was all stuff that was actually coded down in the game. These people that were kind of built up. You could stand on one hand and one foot, and it would come up with this sort of terrible procedural animation for you, and just come there. I mean, it was just, we felt like we needed to do that for whatever reason. I think it was mostly my problem, not my brother's problem at the time. But it fell apart naturally. It didn't work out. And at that time, we had been kind of writing this Dwarf Fortress game that was going to be a small game about having dwarves dig out a little mountain, and then you can come in with an adventure and kind of do this archaeology where you find your old dead civilization. And based on how much of it you find and how much there was to find, that would give you a numeric score, and that would be like high score, good job. But that game started taking up the all the juice out of Armok and swiping features from it. And because it didn't have graphics, it was going so fast. We were just like, okay. And we went ahead with that. So, yeah. So with the main thing, though, with procedural generation, I mean, our goal with Dwarf Fortress is to come up with building blocks and rules, and we're trying to procedurally generate everything eventually. We've got procedurally generated creatures, maps, we've got some items now, materials that things are made out of, the whole civilizations and histories and so on. So the idea is to come up with building blocks that aren't too deep down. I mean, we did eventually get back to having hair and tissues that make up things, but we put them in at a slightly more appropriate time this time, hopefully. And so you want people to be able to, at least our goal is to have people be able to relate to the elements so that everything that happens is a potential narrative driver. You want when people see what happens, we don't try and show numbers, we actually actively try and avoid putting numbers on the screen so there aren't things like hit points and so on, even if it would make it a little easier to understand what's going on in the combat and so on. But we more just want combat to be like, if you swing a sword at someone and it hacks someone's arm off, that's kind of what you expected. And so it's reasonable as a sort of narrative moment. Or I guess in the academic literature, they have tellable moments for video games. I guess it's like something you'd tell your friends. So it's been a trick to try and restrain my own kind of natural tendency to overcomplicate things. But you basically want either the things themselves, like a creature or an item, to be the elements you're working with, or if you've got details down, you want them to have sort of a phenotype from that structure that is relatable. So you're just trying to conserve your own energy and CPU cycles and so on, without kind of going into molecular detail on stuff. And so to try and do that, I mean, we had some kind of design methods we've used. One of the interesting ones was writing stories. We'd actually write down stories and analyze the sentences of them. We want, here's a cheesy fantasy story we want the game to be able to produce. And so how can you do that? Look at, analyze exactly what happened, and if that sentence can actually be produced by the game through the actions of the little building blocks bouncing against each other, then you've made a lot of progress. It's pretty hard to get almost any sentence because it involves most of the time some kind of psychological motive behind it somewhere to get the whole thing to work out, but we aren't really there. But it did, that did inform us a bit. And in general, looking at things like stories and real world examples and so on really help with procedural generation. when we were working on the town maps, I just downloaded a ton of medieval town maps online and just kind of said, okay, what really makes this things up? We've got intersections with roads kind of winding around these buildings and lines, and then you've got plots behind the buildings tying them together and so on. And it's good to have a bag full of tricks, sort of procedural generation tricks. I mean, I don't know how to pronounce anything, but like, I don't know if you remember what they're called, Voronoi diagrams, and there's midpoint displacement, Perlin noise, and diamond square algorithms and stuff, and these kind of subdivision algorithms, and all kinds of random walks you can do, and that kind of thing. It's good to know that stuff, but at the same time, for me at least, it tends to be more important to just iterate towards your goal. You can start with something, but you can't start with the perfect thing almost all the time. If you have a really small thing that you're working on, you can sometimes get a perfect algorithm. But and by perfect, I don't mean it's absolutely perfect. I mean it works well enough. But that's most times not possible. I mean, that's a lot of. I mean. One of the biggest pitfalls I see with video game development is people trying too hard to get it right the first time, and they just don't finish anything. So it's fine to just get. I always try and have a game running by the first day, just to see what I'm working with, and then I can tweak it and make it better. And it's much easier to tweak and make it better when you've got it sitting there. So that's definitely how the town maps worked out. They started off pretty horrible, and now they look pretty good. So that's I mean, I guess there are other things to talk about in terms of design. I mean, I don't suppose you'd want to talk to me about interface design. That would be a tragic error. The interface is very bad, and it's mostly just been a result of us speeding through, adding features and so on, not focusing on it. And yeah, so I can. I mean, there are other things to talk about, I guess, with how we thought of the player's role, and kind of having principles of like the dwarf should be autonomous and so on. We have kind of design principles that we keeps the game running pretty much down the groove we want it to. And there's also, it's kind of interesting what happened when we switched from sort of 2D, one flat plane, to many 3D planes. That's when it really switched from being a game to a simulation, or I guess people call it a toy now, because it doesn't have quite the clear goals and win-loss conditions. But if people wanted to talk about that, I think with the time we've got, I'd maybe switch over to just talking about programming a little bit. Okay, this fat kid is sliding now, just sliding down the leg, so I'll move him again. I can't lock him out. If I lock him out, we'll hear howling and scratching the whole time. So there's no good solutions with this guy. But now he's over there. Okay, so Dwarf Fortress was written in C with object-oriented stuff coming in, C++ing it as I learned that. Like I said, this has been more than a decade now, and I didn't know a whole lot coming in. I don't really have a formal programming education at all, and so I don't have a lot of formal conventions that I follow, and I imagine the thing is pretty atrocious to people that like to have sort of a well-organized program.
I want to point out right now, though, that you do have a PhD in mathematics, correct?
Mathematics. Yes, they're very different things, yes.
Yeah, so you do know math. It's not that you don't know math. You just...
Math I can do. I can do some math. There's all kinds of math, though. I can do flat chains and Banach spaces. Well, that's it, basically. But and even that, I quit, But it was so Dwarf Fortress was, and we compiled to use Microsoft Visual C Express, the free one you can download. I don't know if it's still free, but it was free for a period, and you can download it. And it uses OpenGL for the graphics, which is funny because. It used to be easier to do text with text, like curses and so on, but now it's easier just to tile a couple triangles to make a letter and spit out 2,000 quads or whatever. It's very strange how things work these days, but that's and a guy helped me switch over to SDL, so that's what we're using for Dwarf Fortress. And I think the principal challenges with coding Dwarf Fortress are just generally organizing all of these different kind of structures, since there's so much stuff in the game. But that was sort of an iterative process. It started off pretty simple, and then we added things to it. And I don't have a structure set up that is kind of textbook good for that, but I've just learned a lot of tricks and know why my projects die in the past, and so I've just avoided it, avoided having the game fall apart by getting used to how I work, really. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. It takes a long time to do it that way. So yeah, clean code. I think there's definitely a place for that. But in any case, the the main problem, though, is once you've got all that stuff and you keep building it up, the game gets slower and slower and slower. And for us, optimization has not been about finding just the one thing that'll make it all run faster. It's just 1,000 different little things that give you 1%, and then you profile again and check and fix another little thing. We've got hundreds of creatures running around at once, tens of thousands of items. We've got the fluids flowing. We've got buildings and machines that people make. They make these computers. Those need to run. We've got projectiles flying around on occasion. All the jobs and thoughts of the dwarves, and then the entire world outside with the weather system is one of the ones that really bogged it down because we made that a little too complicated. But the new version's got armies running around outside while you're playing, and the populations grow and populations shrink, and there's all the politics going on. And so that needs to, no matter how much you add, we need to keep that running fast. I mean, there's nothing special about how that runs. It's all just sequential kind of calls on here's running the vermin events, here's running the flows. There are lots of things that are staggered by timers. Like this thing will happen on turn 60 out of 100. This one will happen on 80. This one will happen on 40. And just sort of smeared out to make sure that no particular moment in time, if you did them all on 0, you'd get kind of this every second, you'd get this kerchunk, kerchunk, kerchunk. So spreading things out has been very important. And in general, we try not to do things that don't need to be done. So fluids have all kinds of flags kind of set up in this oct tree type setup that if this square or this section has no fluids, it'll have a flag so it doesn't even check it. And then it'll kind of drill down to where the active fluids are, checking the flags. And then those fluids are staggered every 16th square will get checked every 16th frame, and we try to keep it at 100 frames a second. So that's why you see the water. If you've played the game and had a piece of water on top of a sheet of water, one level higher up, you have one thing of water. It kind of moves in this sort of line pattern. It wiggles around because it's being checked every so often and then moves in a direction that's set, because we can't have any randomization calls in there because it's too slow. So it looks bad in these very specific examples, but on the other hand, we've got water pressure and so on in this 3D map, and it all works out. Like down, if you've got the tube with the water pressure here, and you've got this one shorter, then you want it to equalize, but you can't. It's difficult to do that. I don't know if it's possible. It might be possible to do that as a sort of local cellular automaton or whatever. But we just say, okay, any piece of fluid is tagged as not stable at first, and then it will check below itself, look down, and look for a place that's about as high as itself, the first empty place it gets, and then it picks the lowest one to spit itself up. So it's an expensive flood fill, but the second that flood fill fails, it marks everything that it went through as that it can legally mark as static. So none of those ever get checked again. So there's these rare flood fills when a piece of water falls on another piece of water. It floods out and tries to do the pressure code, and then then you've got a stable lake again. and just that the optimizations like that didn't come from me just doing that and then putting it in. This is all after the fact kind of triage, slow nightmare needed to be fixed type of stuff, and just anything that works. There's other kinds of staggering that happen with like items that want to be stored, can't stay in the storage kind of queue all the time, or people think about them too much when you've got like 10,000 rocks you've dug out and they're all sitting on the ground and you don't have a stone stockpile for them. They can't kind of think about that all the time. And what happened to work out for that one is kind of this staggered thing that I learned from a IT guy, where you have the signal is sent like first every 2 clicks or so, and then every 4, then every 8 with a random wiggle, then every 16, and so on until you get up to about the maximum tolerance for the rock to just sit there with no one looking at it. So say 1,000 clicks, so like 10 seconds or something. And then so you have this kind of attenuation, whatever, and the rock becomes less and less interesting in the game, and it kind of dies down. And we have different places where these things are stored, the different rocks that are checked, and so on. So just any trick you can come up with to make it run faster, that's fair game. We've got another big thing is not cleaning too much. We have all these things, and when one of them dies, you don't want to delete it. Really, if you've allocated it, you don't want to get rid of it immediately. Leaving a lot of dead bodies around is good, because then you can pick one up and just wipe it off and then reuse it. We do that with the flows, especially all the flows that are spraying around, but many other things as well. And that goes with clearing buffers too. I mean, you guys probably use dirty buffers now that you're game developers. You have to have dirty buffers everywhere. So pathfinding, especially with Dwarf Fortress, has a giant map. Vertically makes it quite a number of tiles. So we can't clean pathfinding buffers. Pathfinding leaves data everywhere, right? You're searching around for where you want to put things. And so if you can't clean the buffer, this is actually a trick I learned back when I was trying to do 3D graphics back in the 90s, before we had cards and things that would do it for us, and OpenGL to do it for us. You'd have to actually go draw pixel by pixel the triangle, and you'd have the texture coordinates, and you'd be updating them as you went, and you'd have the kind of depth of it. You'd have to update that as you went along the triangle. And then to avoid triangles being printed over each other when they shouldn't be, that depth would be stored in a buffer. And that's in OpenGL, it's called the depth buffer. I don't know what it is in DirectX, but it used to be called the Z buffer, and because it was storing a kind of Z coordinate. And so the big problem with the Z buffer is you've got a screen. If your screen was, say, 800 by 600 back then, you'd have to clear it every single frame if you were, naively thinking about it, and that just kills the game. So what you do is you have your sort of depth of field or whatever. You'd say, oh, I need about 20,000 integers worth of depth here. And then so you'd start the first frame 0 to 20,000, and then your next frame you'd say my values are 20,000 to 40,000, and you treat everything lower like garbage, right? So you go from 20 to 40, then you go from 40 to 60, 60 to 80, and you only have to clean it then if you're dealing with a 4 byte integer. You would have to clean it like every 100,000 times or something, right? So the problem goes away. It just goes away. And so the pathfinding buffers work like that in Dwarf Fortress. I know what the longest path could be, and then that's the values we work with. And then I reset the floor so that we're working from, say, 0 to 200,000, and 200 to 400, 400 to 600. And I almost never have to clean the path map now. It cleans like every 10,000 paths that are made through a section of it. And that kind of thing comes up elsewhere as well. So just any kind of optimization trick you can come up with, it's handy. There are lots of other things to talk about. I mean, we didn't get into most stuff, but whatever people want to talk about there, I guess it's 3:34, so I better move on to the last bit. And So yeah, if you're going into game development, then there are lots of different options, obviously out there, working for companies and being independent developer, that kind of thing. Are so I'll just for just for I don't know if anyone doesn't know or whatever, but so just really quickly, Dwarf Fortress. What we decided to do is just distribute it for free, basically, because we don't really have business sense or whatever. We didn't want to deal with sales and marketing type stuff, and we didn't want to distribute through a publisher either, because that, I mean, at least in our naive view at the time, that always seems to be kind of meddling and nonsense. So and we didn't have anyone who'd want to take it anyway at the time. So we just tried to distribute it for free and ask for money. So it turned out well enough for it to be a full-time job at kind of, I mean, I don't know if it's a regular programmer salaries these days. The regular programmer salary is always decreasing a little bit, but that's it turned out all right. We don't really advertise, but we do press stuff and allow YouTube monetization streamers and so on, which is kind of like the modern press. So it's worked out well. Just going this route. I mean, you don't make it rich necessarily. There are not that many. There are a few independent people that have blown up, but most people I've met just kind of slogging through it, like we are, and whether or not they've chosen to sell things on the iPhone or distribute by themselves online, or go through eventually go through a distributor like GOG.com or whatever. There's lots of different ways to go. And the nice part is being able to keep our own schedule and not really have any people meddling with us. But we do have to do all of our own administration. There's lots of stuff that needs to be done with the money and email and forums, handling all your community stuff. Whereas if you were part of a larger group, you wouldn't have to deal with the side issues. So, and it's something that you're going to have to do PR stuff. Talking to press people and that kind of thing. If you get a finished project out there and people, play it a little bit, that kind of thing will just come up. Even with projects that aren't successful, they still go through that. Pretty. You don't have to have too many eyes on it before someone wants to talk to you about it. And so the things that you want to consider. If you decide to go this route, there's sort of this broad set of skills you're gonna want to think about at least, but you'll just pick them up over time to the extent that you have to, and it'll it's not. I mean, for me, it was the only way to go, but I'm sure you've had kind of business type people in here, or people that work with larger groups, and I don't have a perspective on that, having not worked in one, and I can only pass along horror stories or whatever, but I don't know if that's the actual picture, so I won't go ahead with it. So yeah, that's me blabbering, but that's I don't know if that's useful at all. There you go.
Questions?
Okay. Have you ever had any trouble with pathfinding?
What?
Pathfinding?
The pathfinding?
Yeah, like
so.
Just getting around safely, most of.
Yeah. It's. I mean, pathfinding is a constant struggle with the dwarves, as there are new hazards and new worries for them to think about. The actual pathfinding, we use A-star now. We didn't used to, but A-star is much faster, so we went ahead with that. And there are other algorithms out there now. People talk about jump point pathfinding and so on. That I don't think that actually works with Dwarf Fortress, but there are lots of algorithms that speed things up quite a great deal. And yeah, so it's a difficult problem because we have a changing map, right? We've got fluids flowing around, we've got enemies and so on everywhere, and there are lots of problems with Dwarven pathfinding as it stands now. They interrupt too often when they see something that they think is threatening, but it can't actually get to them, and so they abort. If you set up places that are forbidden, sometimes they can't find their way around, and we'll just bounce against them. But So what we've tried to do, just to the basic problem of having disconnected areas, right? Because you've got this giant potential maze that the player has dug in whatever shape they like, and they might have a disconnected stairway or something that just doesn't quite connect up. And so you can't do pathfinding checks to every location all the time. Like if you have a dwarf that wants to go grab an item across the map, you can't just run a path and see if it works because it's too slow. And there's too many items to check. If you want to grab one of 100 items, you can't have the dwarf try and path to each one, or it will just bog down and die. And so what we've done, and this is, and it's not a good, or it's not a great solution, but it's difficult to kind of find alternatives, is it keeps track of connected components of the map where the mode of travel is walking instead of flying or whatever. So it will know that this whole item stockpile is section 1, and this dwarf is in section 2, so they don't check these items, or they check the component numbers, and that's it. The map gets changed all the time. When it's sliced through by a fluid, for instance, it updates the connected components with fills. And when people dig out stairways or whatever, it updates the components. And it tries to update as small a portion as possible, but that's not always possible, and then it just redoes the components. And that's it's not ideal because it doesn't work for other modes of travel like flying. That's why the flyers act stupid sometimes, because once they get into a component and they need to think about going a long way, they don't see if a dwarf can't walk there, then they don't think they can fly there. But if a dwarf can walk there, then they fly the shortest route. So even through the sky. So it's kind of strange, but it's been a difficult problem the whole time. And there are pitfalls to any method you might try to get it to work. But yeah, I don't know if I've addressed what you were getting at or whatever.
Hi. I have this problem with my games where I feel like all of the old stuff that I write is terrible. Does that happen to you? Do you feel like you look back at what you did and say, "Oh, this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong"? But
So are you talking about within one game, the older code in the same game?
well, that too, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I mean, because I was thinking if you're talking about my old games, I think all my old games are trash, right? I mean, but you don't have to just look at them and you'll be able to see that. Yeah, don't go to the sub games section, for instance. Fortunately, I mean, all those things are still up there. I mean, you learn. I mean, you should take that as a sign that you're getting better, right? I mean, it would be a sad thing if you were still the programmer you were when you were 10 years old, right? So it's you learn all the time, and it's actually really good. I mean, I think that most of Dwarf Fortress, I think all of Dwarf Fortress is poorly written because I'm not actually good at programming, but the older stuff is worse. The older stuff is much worse. I've got atrocious things from 2002 still sitting inside the game. And you can't get hung up on cleaning all of that up. You clean it up when necessary. Refactoring is really important, but so is getting the job done, right? I mean, it's a hard thing being a perfectionist, and I am in a lot of ways with things, but it's difficult, and you just have to give it up. It doesn't. And think of it as a good thing. Think of it as a good thing. I mean, if you find sometimes you can go back, or when you read. I mean, with Dwarf Fortress, it more happens when I'm redesigning a section. So, for instance, I just had to regut. That's really what it is at this point. But gut the personality profiles again, and so I got a chance to go through all the old code as a matter of this improvement, and at that time I could fix things I didn't like. And so the anything will eventually come under the crosshairs in a longer project, and you can fix it at that time. And but it is full of stuff that I hate. That's definitely.
I had another question too about. Have you seen Anthony Birch's post about like how he thinks games should be a lot easier. That's the only form of entertainment that you get punished for failing at. Like, what if a book was, if you weren't reading it too fast, what if it just slammed shut? Like, what do you think about that? Like, I know that Dwarf Fortress isn't the easiest game, so
Well, I agree. Well, see, no, I don't. First of all, I don't know the thing you're familiar with, so I don't want to talk about it as if I've read it. But just in general, it is kind of the same place we're coming from in a way. Like, I don't like fixed plot games with time limits, for instance. I have trouble with that. Even say Fallout or something, which had a time limit on it in the beginning. Or King's Quest 4, I remember that being the King's Quest that we started having trouble with because there's a time limit of 3 days. Because you do get up to a point, and then you're either in a Walking Dead scenario, or you just know you have to start over because you just don't have enough time left, and then you restart and begin again. So what we've done with Dwarf Fortress, kind of thinking about that's what the sort of losing is fun motto is about, because death pushes the game forward. It doesn't set you back. And then your world is made more interesting by having a dead fortress or an adventurer that has retired and left something behind, or succeeded in killing something and then that thing is dead. And to keep it going as long as we can within one world, that is kind of the idea. So I can definitely see where that. I mean, as I understand the piece, I can see where it's coming from, and I don't think it's universally true for games that that's how they work. I think with the fixed plot game, I mean, it really is. It really is kind of speaking, because like a strategy game, that's just not how it works, right? I mean, you could complain about the same thing about chess if that's your problem with games is losing, but. But with a fixed plot game, I see where they're coming from. That's why, and people have, I think they have been making them easier though, right? They had checkpoints everywhere and save. You can save slots everywhere. And are we still here, or is that? Oh, that's an advertisement. I'm being. You guys went up to the corner, and I have this giant Skype advertisement now. Okay, I've never seen that before. There we go. Let me see if I can turn it off for a second. It's kind of disturbing. Well, of course I can't turn it off. It's not. Well, I just made myself smaller. Okay, so I don't see you guys. Well, I see you guys. Okay. Well, I'm just assuming that while I hear you laughing at my poor situation, that you're still there.
Yeah, we can still see you, man, so.
Okay. So yeah. So that's good. Well, I can full screen this now. There we go. There you're back. Sort of. Okay. So yeah. So yeah, from that limited perspective of the plot game, I see where it's coming from, and I think people have made plot games easier, and I don't know if that's necessarily completely. I mean, it doesn't need to go all the way there, and it really depends on the audience. I mean, some people like a hard game with a story and don't mind losing and coming back, and then if you're more into the game for the story, I can see how it would disturb you. But for me, I always just kind of wrote those off and just said like, well, I'll read a book or whatever. I don't care. Even though games do have things to offer as far as story and interaction goes that other mediums can't accomplish. But it's it does bother me sometimes because I'm not that good at anything. I'm not that good at playing games. So I mean, it was true of it's like a platformer, for instance. I'm really not good at those, and have trouble finishing them, and then it restarts you back at the beginning. It's always done that, right? But I wasn't really playing Mario for the story, so it didn't bother me so much. I think it was cool to see a new level, for instance, but. But there, I mean, and you can kind of extend it to the middle cases, say Dark Souls, for instance, which is a game I could win, but there was a lot of re-walking back to places where I had died. And the walk back, it really padded the game time out, right? I don't remember how many hours it took me, but I know that at least half of that time was walking through undangerous places to get back to where I was stuck. And if that's, I mean, you do have to consider what losing means in the game, and but I mean, I don't think just a blanket making the game easier is a solution to it, and I think that would turn some people off. And there are different games for different people. There are plenty of easy games out there to play. So I guess it's about the universalness of games as an art form. It's is a game supposed to be universally appreciated, and I think that's not important really. I mean, it just doesn't matter to me at all, obviously. I mean, our game is certainly not about universal appreciation, or we'd have done something about it. And different strokes for different folks and stuff and that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know if that addresses the point at all because I didn't read the thing. So
No, that was good.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
We'll go. Okay.
Okay. I've been thinking like a lot of times now we really focus on better graphics and better graphics and better graphics. So was it a design choice to kind of choose the 16-bit or 8-bit graphics that you guys chose? And with that being said, do you think it adds longevity to the lifespan of the game, based that it's not necessarily I'm not gonna say it's like not as next gen as some people would consider?
I think so. So our main reason for choosing the graphics of this game came out of Armok 1, where we tried our hand at 3D graphics and it was a disaster. But the main thing is the development speed for us was also the main draw. You just don't have to draw it, so you can or you draw like a U or something, and then there you have your bucket or whatever. So that's the draw for us because we have such a long feature list we want to get through. And now, addressing the specific question, though, I think because the sort of roguelike style of graphics is a recognized aesthetic that some people can get into. Some people really hate it. So, that is a longevity issue in that sense, in that they already left that kind of style of graphics behind and won't touch it. But for people that don't mind, then yeah, I think it adds to the life of the game. I mean, if as long as we're still supported by the basic operating systems and stuff, and we're all still healthy and so on, I mean, Dwarf Fortress will be here in 2020, 2030, and people will still be able to play it because the style itself is very simple and relatable. And you run into a problem as you add graphics to your game because people do talk about games from. I don't know quite when it started, maybe with the first person shooters and 3D graphics, and people started to play with that. That there are certain moments where something really fell out of style, like using photographs for your characters' portraits. It's sort of notorious in some of the mid-90s games that when you go back and play them, it doesn't age well. And so when you choose a graphic style, you're really risking that in terms of the longevity of your game. But I don't think it necessarily has to do with next gen versus just being bad, because there's there's styles that people like, that people work with, and there's a lot of sort of retro indie game type stuff where people will use 2D graphics or a certain style of 3D graphics, and then the reviews of that style will be, whatever. It depends. I don't know much about art stuff, but it just, does it live well? Is it kind of an ageless or timeless style, whatever that means? I mean, I don't have a really vocabulary for that, since I'm not an artist at all. But that's kind of my impression, is that if you think about your art style and don't use a lot of gimmicks and things, and you're focusing on make something that's aesthetically valuable, then it can survive wherever on the spectrum you are, from text up to trying to do a next gen game. And if you're kind of sloppy with it or unlucky, then people will think it looks bad later on.
All right, you.
Yeah. So this is my question: is how do you go about collaborating with your brother in designing Dwarf Fortress?
So yeah. So he doesn't program the game, which is a plus for us, because I don't know, use version control and all that. We'd have to learn how to do it, and it would be a mess. So fortunately, it's just a design collaboration, mostly just sitting and talking about stuff at this point. We had that thing where we passed stories around, and he still has the stories online, and that did help flush some things out. But we don't do that so much anymore. Mostly we just talk about what I'm stuck on. See, the thing with Dwarf Fortress, we've been working on this fantasy game for 20 years now, not Dwarf Fortress in particular, but the general idea. So we're on the same page at this point, and it's really just when I kind of get stuck with the particular, or we're moving into a new section, we'll sit down and talk about it. Mostly we just talk about other games now, and we have other projects and stuff we're working on, and then we really do just sit down and talk about it. We both have tablets, draw a bunch of stuff, but there's no kind of formalized, or there's nothing computerized. I know people have these kind of design document things, and I mean I have a bunch of development crap online, but none of that's really collaborative, and so I don't know much about like formalized collaborative development. If there's things that people do in companies where they have meetings with programs and stuff, and then they go online with their phones and put ideas, and then actually my friend who lives on the peninsula here, they have Google, so he works with some people to design games, and they have these kind of Google documents, and his collaborators will come in and write paragraphs in the different blocks that they've set out for different sections of the game, like coming up with a new monster or a character class type thing. And then he'll come in and color the backgrounds of the blocks, and it's kind of like feedback or whatever. They'll turn red and green and stuff. So yeah, I guess everyone's got their own interesting way of doing things. I mean, but with Zach and I, it's just kind of sitting and talking about stuff at this point, like the current thing that we're working on, and making sure that we don't. We each have our own little things that we don't like, and so we just try and smooth out a few differences of opinion on things, and it's a good thing. It just kind of restrains my bad habits of doing detailed thing. If you notice restraint ever, then it's not me. It's usually my brother telling me that you're going a little too far with the genetics or whatever. So it's yeah, but you know so he has a good eye for that kind of thing.
All right, other questions? Okay.
Yeah, like Dwarf Fortress has a lot of stuff in it, and it takes a lot of iterations to actually start like getting a lot of it. Like, have you ever thought about like making a tutorial for it, or would that be a lot more?
We've started tutorials, and so we're definitely going to do it. I mean, I know there's a whole camp of people that think games shouldn't have tutorials and thinks that it should be obvious how to play the game, but I kind of given up thinking how to do that for Dwarf Fortress. So I'm like, you might actually have to tell someone something and show them how it works. And I think that tutorials would actually be one of the. I mean, there are three things more or less that really suppress the player base for Dwarf Fortress. One is the graphics, which we can't really help, and we've got some modders that have actually helped out with that and have kind of an isometric view now that works, although it doesn't process input as far as I know, but it's a viewer. And so that's one of the big ones, and there's not too much we can do about that. There's the interface itself, which just has this completely horrible clunkiness to it. And then there's just the learning curve, which is hampered by the interface especially. But there's also just a learning curve because there is so much and no direction in the beginning. So just telling people that they can dig, I mean, right now that's hidden under a designations menu or whatever. So it's like it's just impossible to kind of get into it. And so I've started writing tutorials. It's probably been it's one of these projects where I have a little trouble getting started on that because my existing player base doesn't care too much, and so I just need to kind of set aside time for it to do it. And when I do it, when I started writing this kind of mining tutorial that kind of ran through some stuff, then I run into my own interface. I'm like, do I really want to write instructions for that? When it's so terrible, it makes me want to change it. So it's probably going to happen at the same time. I'm probably going to be cleaning up the interface, like when you embark, if you have to press H, J, and whatever, and then you have to press Shift, H, J, whatever to resize the rectangle. It's all just horrible, and it makes me want to go through and rewrite the instructions when I do it, but then it starts to become too large of a project. So there's this kind of circle that I'm stuck on that I just need to break myself out of, but it's definitely something that's going to happen.
Anyone else? Okay.
So I guess one question is, how much longer do you plan on working on Dwarf Fortress? And I know you said you're also working on some other games right now. So what are your plans for when you're done?
So we've had the development notes up for a long time, and I have this unpublished list of the things that I mean, it's all basically published, but the list itself in this format isn't published because it's kind of a working document. But it goes through 1.0, like what I want in, what's been pushed out, and that list is the version number 0.34 is 34% through the list. So if we go by the timing, then it's another 20 years to finish, and that's just a lot to promise, right? I mean, it's a lot to say. I mean, my motivation is high now, and I'm like, I'll go, go for it. But who knows what's going to happen, right? I mean, we've already had a health scare this month, and we're not old people or young people. I'm 35, so I can do 20 years. It's been done. People get to 55, and but if they get bored, I mean, it's complete hubris to say, I'm not going to get bored or whatever, or I'm going to be able to make it, right? It's just crazy to assume that's how life is going to turn out. But that's the plan. The other projects, we just don't know what to do with them. There are lots of large projects we're working on, some small ones, and we don't have too much time to spend on them. So they kind of have large project ambitions and small project time, and we work on them just to play with stuff, have no real thoughts of distributing or publishing them. And one of the main obstacles, though, is maintaining two games at once seems like a really hard thing to do. So if we put out another game, we want it to be kind of finished, just patch out bugs or whatever, but not just add whole new features or whatever. To have another ongoing development thing and having two player bases fighting with each other over our time or whatever, that kind of thing would not be good. So it's those things. There are months where those draw a lot of our attention, the side projects, and then there are months like this last month where we didn't touch them because we're kind of crunching through Dwarf Fortress and hoping to get a release up this year. So it's it's hard. It's hard to say where those are going to go. I mean, we don't talk about details on them because there's kind of this hype that gets built up about it, and we don't want people to think that there's going to be another game necessarily. But it's definitely it's good to have other things to work on, to try new things out, and because when we tested out, for instance, in one of the games we tested out having an RPG where you've got a whole lot of counters you need to keep track of, in terms of how much plundering and drinking and wandering the world you've done. And there are negative effects from not satisfying the counters. And we were wondering, because this is a big question for Dwarf Fortress too, is if you have a RPG where you're trying to give the character some character, is it a put off to the player who's trying to kind of freely role play in their game, or does it make it more fun? And so what the answer to that question depends on just how well it's implemented as usual. So we tried to come up with trying to find a nice middle ground with that stuff. And it turns out, it probably is pretty fun to have those kind of things to track. I mean, certainly games don't shrink away necessarily from having a hunger counter, and that's kind of the least fun counter you could come up with. If the counters have more meaning and you still have to maintain and babysit them a little bit, but if they have more game impact than just having to scrounge up food, you can have more fun with them. And so it's been a valuable exercise for that reason, if nothing else. But so there's stuff, things, yeah.
All right. Any more? My doesn't got one. Okay. Well, one more.
All right. So, how? Oh, I suppose I know what you're gonna answer this. I have this game that I'm making where it's a open world car racing game, and this pre-built script for a car that I had it's really complicated, and it has this thing called the Jacob coefficients, which are about 50 different coefficients that list how a tire behaves under certain circumstances. And like I had to go do all sorts of research, and I joined the automotive engineering club and all this stuff so I could learn about what's going on here. How much research do you do when trying to come up with something more simulation-like? Like I know Dwarf Fortress is very simulation-like as opposed to just, oh, I'm going to click this button, I'm just going to do it, you know. And then I'm guessing the answer you're going to say is I go too far and my brother reels me back.
Well, yeah, but I'll try and give you something more helpful. So the answer, I guess, without bringing up my brother and the fishing rod and so on, is yeah. I always try and find some kind of real world analog to what I'm doing, and I always try and research it. And I always try and stick with the. I don't always succeed in doing this because sometimes I feel rushed, but I always try and use the real numbers and try and use equations when I can, because if you base your procedural content and in the case of the scripting and the racing, it's still, I mean, kind of procedural in that sense, on the real world. If you base it on the real world, then when you have defects and problems, you can, especially big problems, you can address them by comparing it to the real world analog and just looking for the deficiency, like with our economy, trying to set up the economy with supply and demand and so on. It's always going to have trouble and problems because there are no kind of there's not a lot of ingenuity that the individual actors can have to solve their troubles. But if certain items are stacking up in one place or not being sold somewhere else, and you just think about it in terms of economic principles, and you're like, well, they're not doing this at all, so I need to put that in the game. And the same holds of we added all of the material components, like it's similar to what you were talking about. We now have all the tensile yield, tensile strength, fracture points, and so on. We just added 18 numbers to the materials, and it does seem, it's just like, it seems like maybe just a step too far, but I think in the end it's going to make the materials act like people would expect them to act, so that we don't have to write special handling for a sword stabbing through a sheet of glass or something. It'll kind of break when it's supposed to break and not break when it's not supposed to break, and break how it's supposed to break when we get to that. And so all the combat code benefited from that sort of thing. So and it held for our, like, the town maps I was talking about. I went through all kinds of lists of those. I researched all the geology we did. Yeah, someone made the joke that Wikipedia is the design document for Dwarf Fortress. That's kind of how I treat it. Just going through and really checking it, because it helps to do that. Now that's we have the fortune in Dwarf Fortress of modeling basically a normal place, right? So there's some fantasy stuff, but all the real world things still apply. So if you had a more abstract game, then the best you could hope for is probably to have a model or in your mind of visualization of how things are supposed to be, and then just go for kind of a verisimilitude thing, that you want things to behave how people expect, and that you can kind of try and patch up deficits that way. But it does tend to be a kind of negative process that way, to try and have this ideal and then work toward it by filling in problems or fixing problems. It tends to increase my motivation just as a practical thing, that when something's broken, I want to fix it rather than just building something from scratch. And so it's another reason I get the game up and running the day I start it, so that I have this defective thing to look at. It's like I was saying about perfectionism, I guess. It kind of harnesses that energy that I have to clean things up like that. But so I definitely go that way. I mean, there is too deep, and it's like the numbers that you're using, if they're there to solve a problem or to make things look nice and they work and that's what they do, that's good. If they're there to be there, or they get filtered into the simulation but don't really have an effect, and you're pretty sure you're not going to use them down the line, then there was no reason for them to be there, right? So yeah, as long as they're doing something, then it's perfectly fine, especially if the goal is to make the realistic kind of driving open world simulation, right? Because then that's what you're going to get. So.
Right. Anyone else?
Do you do game jams at all? Just a short answer question.
Does that involve lots of other people doing them? I've never done like say a 7-day roguelike, and I've never gotten together with a bunch of people and done things. But I had this thing that I did quite a bit growing up. It was just called the 3-hour knockoff. You have 3 hours, you make a game, and we made a bunch of those. And yeah, I've done that's pretty much it though. I've never tried to, and if it's about that's actually creating the game. I don't know if game jam's always about creating the game or just designing them. Sometimes people go through these sort of blitz design sessions, and I've definitely done that on tablets before. Just kind of gone through and try and make ideas, some games, so on, but nothing formal. And I don't know much about it. I'm not really a social type of go out and meet and talk to people kind of person in the end. So I don't seek that kind of thing out, and so I don't know much about it.
Right. So we're good. Everyone's good to catch questions answered. Okay. All right. I'll appear in the frame. So thanks for talking with us. Spending the time here. I don't know if I'm sitting too low now, but.
I see you.
Okay, yeah, thanks for spending the time talking to us. I enjoyed it a lot because I'm a huge fan of the game, but I think the rest of the club, too, they enjoyed talking to someone who's been making games for 30 years, you said, so not many people have been working on games that long. So, yeah, thanks for spending the time with us.
Yeah, it's cool. No, it was fun talking to you guys. I like that there are video game development clubs now. I think that's awesome.
So, anyway, yeah, thanks again. So I guess we'll wrap it up. And yeah, all right, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Well.